Thank you very much, Leah. Okay, the first question is for Councillor Alistair Binney-Loveoak. Alistair, you have drafted a motion for Hackney to endorse the plant-based treaty, which will become the second London borough to endorse after Lambeth. Big cheer for Lambeth there, eh? What policies and priorities will change in Hackney if the motion passes, and how can we spread this to more London boroughs and ultimately get London to endorse as well?
Thank you. The policies are looking very closely at what the local borough has control over, and there is sort of less and less. We used to have more control over the schools, and a lot of those schools are now outside of direct local authority control. But there is also places within the council where we have a sort of trend-setting ability. So, for example, we have an AGM where lots of people are invited and they put on a big meal, and that has been transitioning towards more and more plant-based provision. I think the last one, which just happened in May, was fully vegetarian, but they had some dairy and dairy products. But we're trying to get them to go further and further. And they've been doing some really good work actually behind the scenes, even before we passed this motion, trying to do some of the behaviour change and showing the different departments what a plant-based diet is like. So they've been doing taster sessions, including in the sort of waste collection department, where you have the people running the trucks, looking at, this is a vegan sausage rather than a meat sausage, and trying to get them bought in before it goes fully plant-based. So there's lots of things we can do, but the way that we're looking at it primarily is, you were talking about, for us, it's often starting from the ethical point of view, but for a lot of councils, the way in is from the climate point of view. A lot of councils have climate action plans, and obviously plant-based provision is one of the biggest areas that they can take action on and that they have any kind of control over. So I think that from the sort of top-down perspective, it's about, this is what the climate policies are, let's try and implement them and push them to go further. And from the bottom up, it's saying, this is what your constituents want. So trying to reach out to people who are voters, we've got elections next year, trying to get those people to speak to their councillor candidates and say, can you push for this? Can you, this is an election issue for me.
Well, that's brilliant, wonderful. And do you have any feedback from Lambeth as a prototype? Do you know, does that kind of change things a lot?
I haven't spoken to them. I haven't spoken to them directly recently. We sort of took a lot of the model of the motion that the plant-based treaty provided, and then tried to look at how to apply that in the Hackney context and seeing what they were already doing and how they could go further. It's kind of very different borough to borough, so it's really great to have these model motions, and then we wanted to put lots of additional really good things in there. We want to say yes, we support the plant-based treaty and all of its sections, but we also want to say Hackney can go further and do this X, Y, and Z. And that can be difficult because it sometimes, especially if you're not in the majority, you're not running the authority, there can be a little bit of pushback, and there's also a little bit of behaviour change and understanding and education work that has to go into the councillors who would then vote for that kind of motion.
Yeah, well, brilliant, wonderful. I mean, it's fantastic it's being taken so seriously. That's great, thank you. A question for Councillor Graham Neal here. How can councillors overcome political resistance and promote plant-based policies?
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Somebody said a long time ago that politics is show business for ugly people. And obviously we had the glamour earlier, and here are the fellas. I'm sure you don't mind me saying that. But it's quite unusual for me to be on an all-male panel. But hey, things can change. So how can we appeal to what's the question? How can we overcome political resistance and promote plant-based policies? Well, essentially, there's the climate, there's a diversity and EDI. We spoke earlier about protected characteristics, and thanks to Geordie for his work on that. Ethics, of course, all of our politicians want to be seen as nice guys, nice people who don't kill animals. We're all animal lovers now. Politicians told off for raising taxes, so there's the sort of financial impact of eating meat and dairy and serving meat and dairy. And of course there's the health impacts. So these are all ways, mechanisms that we can use and leverage as politicians to encourage our colleagues, both within our political parties, and Alistair touched as your role and my role as being opposition councillors, how we can sort of shame the administration, the majority parties in our local councils, into embracing a plant-based future for us all.
Excuse me, do you get much resistance when you start talking about it?
Very much so. I've been vegan for more than 30 years. I was first elected in 2002, and there are still councillors that I work with that don't know that I'm vegan, simply because of the pushback that I get.
Yeah.
It's a tough game. Alistair, I'm sure you'll agree. It's a tough game. Politics is not really, there are some very unpleasant times.
Yeah.
And to be isolated and to be identified, to be othered as a vegan. And I'm sure that's something that many of us have experienced in our personal lives, but in our political lives it can be quite a challenge, because often politicians want to be seen as a sort of, at the top of the bell curve, as a kind of, the sort of medium, as a sort of man of the people. And once we start identifying ourselves as one of the 3 or 4% that are vegans, that live on plant food, we get sort of ostracised and
also
pushed away.
terrible.
I've lost my. I'm going back. If I can come back to my notes.
Yes, sorry.
If you can give me a minute. So politicians, does it win votes? Well, it might win the vote of the people in this room, the 3 or 4% of the population. But then is it going to ostracise the other 96%? And unfortunately, often it does. So how can we portray ourselves as ethical and sound mind? I mean, in this room, it's an argument that I don't have to make. But how do we get across to the wider population that what we're doing actually is serving the people that we represent by protecting the planet for them, protecting their health, trying to provide an inclusive diet for them, and trying to help them to live in a sort of ethical way. There is often pushback against that. I touched on EDI, the equality, diversity and inclusion, serving, as we know in this room again, we know that vegan food is just about universally acceptable. So if there are religious groups or other groups that have restricted diet, often it's easier to cater for them with a plant-based diet. And yet trying to get that across to other politicians who are quite closed-minded often, and they'll talk about, yeah, but it's about freedom of choice, isn't it? And of course they're trading their freedom of choice with our children's and our grandchildren's future on this planet. So that's an argument that we have to have. I'll quit just here, but or perhaps there's another question, and I'll come back on question 6 with some more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Then the next question is for Richard Nicholson. When you were a Havens Heath Town Councillor, you secured Plant-Based Treaty's first council endorsement in Europe. How did you get your fellow councillors on board with the Plant-Based Treaty, and what lessons have you learned which could help larger cities like London adopt it and make meaningful changes?
I think that each council will have to navigate their own route through this journey. Just to give you the story of Havens Heath and the timeline there. So I was elected in 2020. I was a paper candidate for the Green Party, had no thought that I'd actually get voted in. So I ended up voted in as a councillor in a Conservative-dominated, very traditional, small C Conservative town. My background is a physicist, astrophysicist, so I tend to lean into science very heavily rather than perhaps politics and these sorts of things. And so I just did what I knew. I remember the first town council meeting we had where I said, look, we've not declared a climate emergency yet. Why haven't we done this? It's clearly an existential threat. We're all sat here. What's the problem? Immediately got pushed back. We don't want to frighten people. The government needs to declare this. It's not up to us really. Just town concerns are the things that we're concerned with. But basically, had the argument that look, we're signposting, we're saying we acknowledge this issue. Let's sign it and then move on. and actually got an agreement to do that. That was an interesting learning point for me, not to try and grandstand, but to try and finesse the other people within the council towards the solution that we wanted to get to. So then I was involved in the climate working group. So the working group was responsible for trying to identify actions that the local town council could take to address the climate issue that we just recognised. And there again, I defaulted back to science, and there's a project called the Drawdown Project. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. Yeah? One or two of you nodding in the audience. So what I did was I took the Drawdown Project and I said, okay, clearly some of these things are not relevant to us, but some of the things can be done locally and are relevant to us. So let's order these issues in the Drawdown Project, see which are the highest impact ones, and look at what we could do in those areas possibly as a local town council. And sure enough, two of the highest things within that Drawdown Project are food waste, plant-based food system. Okay? So then the question turns to, and again it's a discussion with all my colleagues, what could we do in each one of these areas? How can we signpost that food waste is bad? How can we encourage people to reduce that? How can we signal that a plant-based diet is good? And quite interestingly, some of my Tory colleagues say, well, eating more vegetables, that's not a bad thing. I sort of agree with that. And so the recommendation went through from the working group to basically endorse the plant-based treaty, because that's a good thing, and look for ways to reduce food waste. Okay? At that point, I sat back and let the process run. Because one of the things in council is that they're very tuned to political positioning, very tribal. And if I expressed any interest during the voting process on this, it would have signalled an over-interest in it, and it would have been blocked. So I did exactly the opposite. I was completely disinterested from then on. It got through the environmental stage, got voted through, got through the town council, got voted through. The day after, I was in touch with the town clerk saying, get that treaty signed, because we're done. At that point, all hell broke loose. I had the NFS chasing me down. I had local nutritionalists in the area saying that Hayward Heath was going to force feed elderly pensioners vegan food and damage the health. All sorts of articles in newspapers that you can still find. And the response at that point was just to sit back and just let it wash over. Okay, because this was going to burn itself out. And if nothing else, we'd stepped over the line, allowing other councils to now follow, because we've been the first. And I'll stop at that point.
Brilliant, again. Are you going to say something here? Okay, next, thank you so much for that, thank you. Next question is for Alex Harmon. What can, yes, this seems like the last question I've just asked, sorry, I've got my numbers mixed up here. Give me 1 second, everyone, sorry. It's which one is it? That one, yeah, that one. Is this one, yeah?
Yes.
What can big cities like London do to promote a shift to plant-based foods? How can the plant-based treaty's 40 proposals, such as those addressing food justice, be integrated into national or local policy frameworks to support low-income communities' access to plant-based foods?
Thank you for the
Long
question.
question, did you understand it?
I did, just
Brilliant,
about,
great,
yeah.
thank you.
So I guess there's two key parts to the question. Firstly, what can London do? And secondly, it's really prioritising around food and justice, food security for low-income people. So firstly, what can London do? Firstly, they can declare a climate emergency, like other people have done. But the second thing that should follow that is to then endorse the plant-based treaty. What that very simply means is that they are supporting the call for a global treaty to be made. The plant-based treaty, you can have a look on the website, it's got 40 proposals, and that basically lists out how we go from a shift in systems from animal agriculture to a plant-based food system, and then to essentially restore and rewild all the land that we free up. So just by signing the treaty as a city like Hayward Heath and Lambeth have done, it signals to other towns and cities that this is the direction we should go in, and then also it signals to cities outside of the country, across Europe, around the world, but then also signals it to a national level so that the UK, the national government, can address the treaty, so that we have this ultimate view that the UK endorse the treaty, then we have countries endorse, and we get to that system change. So very minimally, London can first off just sign the treaty and call for change. But secondly, as a council and all the boroughs, they can look at internal catering at council events, and they can look at sort of educating institutions in the local area, doing public education campaigns. They can focus on different institutions that they have power over, and this is a thing around different councils that I guess all you councillors will know, is that each council has slightly varying powers in their authority. So some will have an influence on schools directly, some can just have a sort of an influence from an outside view and try and suggest things rather than mandate things. So each of the council has different powers, and it's what can they utilise in their powers, but also being ambitious at the same time. And yeah, and sort of encouraging menu change in local businesses as well. So things like increasing plant-based options, reducing the surcharge on plant-based milks in local cafes and restaurants is a really good thing that the council can support these businesses on. And then I guess, what else have we got that councils can do? There's so many things and different motions. Like I say, we have a model motion that councils can endorse and sort of implement, but there's other things we can do around the community as well. So can they implement community gardens and allotments? What can be done to sort of increase the accessibility of those foods? So looking at all the different green spaces that can be utilised, what can be done? And other creative things in terms of advertising public spaces. So a city in the Netherlands, I think it's pronounced Nijmegen, I may have pronounced that wrong, but they endorsed recently and they've actually put a ban on meat advertising in the city. So what could London do in terms of banning meat advertising or unsustainable advertising? Climate friendly things should be prioritised as another interesting thing they could do. And also more concrete examples, so a Hackney motion that could be going forward hopefully looks at implementing Earth Days in schools, so having at least 2 days a week of plant-based foods being offered in their catering, and also sourcing local organic foods and making sure they're healthy, nutritious, complete foods. So yeah, Hackney's got a few example motions going forward there, and also came across the Eat Like a Londoner campaign. I'm not sure if people are aware of that, but on there it's a really good website that's got tips and recipes on how to cook plant-based foods. How to cook plant-based foods, recipes, and also to help people reduce their costs. How can you eat plant-based foods on a low-cost diet, and reducing food waste as well. So I guess part one of that was what can London do, but also how can cities sort of focus on the food injustice and the food security side. And there's various ways, and again, people can be, or councils can be creative in terms of their powers. So I guess I'll just talk about it. Thank you. Cool. Just breaking it. So subsidising plant-based foods could be an initiative that councils can do to help people access and afford plant-based foods, whether they're in community centres or other institutions. How can they subsidise so make plant-based foods cheaper? And secondly, there's the idea of using vouchers, coupons, prepaid cards that can sort of influence and incentivise people to opt for plant-based foods, but also support them if they've got low income. So there's an NHS scheme called Healthy Start Vouchers, which some might be aware of. I don't know if it's rolled out nationally, but I was speaking with a councillor in Southampton, and they use this Healthy Start scheme for pregnant women and women who have recently had a child. I think if the child is under 4, they're entitled to a prepaid card which can be spent on plant-based food, sort of like fruits and vegetables, and I think cow's milk. But the idea of that is a really interesting strategy, that if we can have that as an initiative, what else can be done to support plant-based foods purchasing? So something similar, whether it's prepaid cards that are loaded monthly, coupons, something like that can be done at a local level. And then I guess in terms of more of the community side, so cooking classes, how can we educate people in terms of the skills of cooking healthy plant-based foods at a low cost? I think there's a lot of places and like community centres that are a great idea, that people can come in, do some cooking classes, learn some skills, taste some good food, And the councils could do that. In Exmouth, after they endorse the treaty, they run a monthly potluck event. So people come along, bring lots of food, share their experiences, and that's another really good creative way that councils can do that. Yeah, other things locally, you've got, I guess you can look at community gardens, allotments, food banks, making sure that plant-based foods are sort of staple products there. Also, I think a key thing is to actually monitor and track some of this progress, because you want to make sure that the people that need this are constantly getting those requirements and are constantly sort of assessing the demographics of those people. So to keep monitoring the uptake of it, if people aren't sort of taking it up, why not? Is it because they don't know about it, or is it because the wrong food's being offered? So that's quite a lot of things, but these are why councils can be really creative in what they can implement.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks very much. Can I just share something personally? Why did you give me his mic? I thought you were sending me a letter. Shut up, what I was going to say is, it is very, because the pushback, as far as this is concerned, is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I always ask myself, probably on a daily basis, why are people so frightened of the kindest diet on the planet?
Yeah.
The most compassionate, the most generous diet on the planet, people are so frightened of it.
I can answer that.
Say again?
I can answer that. The status quo is being driven by the monetary interest.
Exactly.
And advertising just keeps on
Absolutely.
telling you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that also happens a lot as well. People say, how can you tell a vegan? They never stop talking about it. And I say to them, did you watch television last night? How many adverts do you see that you accept totally that endorse meat? And they don't say anything. I was a vice president for the RSPCA for many years, and coming up to its 200th birthday last year, in the year before that, I said, why don't you make a big move to celebrate the 200th birthday and do what your founder did and become an abolitionist charity rather than a political master? So I wrote to the board and I wrote to the CEO and I said, I've been a vice president for you for many, many years now, and every time I come to an event, I say to you, you ask me to come here, you ask me to speak, but you can't give me anything to eat. And when I visit your headquarters, you have nothing that I can eat. I said, why don't you have a vegan chapter as part of your manifesto, firstly? Why don't you stop doing RSPCA assured? Because how can you explain to me where there isn't cruelty in killing any animal? And could you also adopt a policy of not phasing out animal testing, but banning it now because it doesn't work? So I sent the CEO this letter. And this letter, the next letter I received was a letter asking me to celebrate their 200th birthday, which hadn't corresponded with the letter that I sent with them. So they sent me a letter saying, we're looking forward so much to celebrating our 200th birthday with you. The next letter I got was, we realise you reached a certain age, Peter, perhaps you'd like to retire. And indeed, they retired me. And they said it was because I said, okay, would you like me to write to all your followers and say that the RSPCA is not against cruelty, but they're actually against age? Anyway, the fact that long and the short of it is, I'm very happy no longer to be a vice president of an organisation where the people on the ground do great work, but the board level people do appalling work as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
Okay, another one for Alistair. How can local governments collaborate with organisations like the Plant-Based Treaty to pilot plant-based initiatives, such as vegan days in council canteens, and measure their impact?
Yeah, I think this is interesting, and it comes back to what we were saying before. Like, the council has fewer and fewer levers in it itself. You see their budgets getting squeezed, and the things that they have control over seem to be less and less. You know, there are very few canteens in the council. There is one canteen for the waste collection service, I believe, and very few others. So I think that we have to look quite into the minutiae of what the council does to figure out where those levers could be. Yes, the motion is the kind of big theatrical, you go to a full council meeting, there's a debate, there's a vote, and then you get a motion, and then you can present that and say, this council has endorsed this, and that can snowball and have a big effect more broadly. But the detail of what a council does is hidden away in lots of PDFs of reports and papers, and that's what you need to support your local councillors to dig into those if you can. So I've seen things in I'm on a corporate committee, and the corporate committee is a very dull committee. It's one of the dullest of all the committees about what the council does in terms of like food standards and waste collection, those kinds of things. But if you dig into that, they had a whole section on food sustainability and sustainability within food, but it didn't mention anything about plant-based eating at all. And so we, interrogating that, in that meeting means that they're more likely to come back to you. But in terms of working with other organisations, we mentioned about community foods and training. I think we've got a chef at the back who's worked with Made in Hackney, who are a really great plant-based organisation who I'm really proud of in Hackney. And I've done things with Shoreditch Trust as well. Did plant-based cookery lessons, and I think those things are really important. Some councils, fewer in London, but some councils do have control over advertising space. Because obviously in London, all of the transport advertising is controlled by the Mayor of London and TfL, and so we should be putting pressure on them. They have, I think, in the tube network, they have a rule against high HFSS, high fats, sugar, salts foods, but then companies like McDonald's get around it by having an advert for their coffee or for their light chicken burger, and it's not as high in sugar and salt and things. But councils sometimes also have advertising space that they have control over. So before I was a councillor, I launched a thing called Adblock Hackney, which is trying to block public space advertising and try and protect people from the harms that kind of advertising causes. And we were asking the council to ban advertising around gambling, around high fat, sugar and salts, etc. And we managed to get them to have that policy, but they left out high carbon advertising. So we brought in a motion, and then they had to add high carbon advertising to that. And so we're waiting to see whether or not they try and sneak through some, if they advertise everything with beef in it, you could say, there's a good argument to say that's high carbon advertising, even though it's not a fossil fuel direct company. So there are lots of really little details, and there are lots of really great campaigning organisations. So on the advertising side, Ad Free Cities has done a lot of really great work in terms of trying to block harmful advertising, and we think about the broader impacts of animal agriculture and the industries that kind of support it. But you can get into the detail and do some blocks there. And I think there are just so many ways, and there's kind of like the top down where you've got government saying do this, do this, do this, and we need to create that bottom up swell, and this is what we're doing here today, and we need to do that, in conjunction with elected representatives, and if they're not doing what we want, then we need to vote them out and get new ones in.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Alistair. Question now from Graham. What practical steps can councillors take to advocate for plant-based policies within their parties, and how can younger people play an active role in positive change within their communities?
Thanks, Peter. So, this question illustrates that political parties, in a sense, are like a pyramid, and there's the sort of leader and the members of parliament at the top. But beneath that, there are people that support them and influence them. And with people like Alistair and myself, you can influence the local councillors, who will then in turn influence policy. So if you wanted to join a political party, it's the difference between selecting some food from a menu and actually working with the chef and writing the menu. So I'd encourage you all to get involved in, if you've got time on your hands, to get involved in party politics. But maybe that doesn't go down so well. It's not, I'm not hearing raucous applause for that suggestion. Alistair mentioned the dullest of the dullest. I'm sure we could have a competition, a sort of top trumps competition about the dullest meeting that we'd sat through. So how can councillors affect policy and affect their sort of seniors in the party? Well, there are different types of local councillors. There are socialists that would be concerned with ethics, with trade unionism, public sector and working conditions. So you can talk to socialists about those aspects of the meat and dairy industry. Liberals will tend to be evidence-based. So talk to them about land use, again ethics, water use, the loss of calories as it moves up the food chain, the loss of wildlife opportunities, and how reforestation can help protect nature. There will be environmental parties like the Green Party. So talk to them about climate change and the carbon footprint of meat and dairy. And then if some of us are represented by Conservatives or even Reform councillors, talk to them about the cost, the financial cost of meat and the impact of meat and dairy on the natural world. So that's some practical steps that local councillors can take to advocate for plant-based policies within their parties. How can younger people play an active role? Well, in my party, we've got this sort of legend of young people. We've got to introduce young people. We're all getting older. We've got to introduce young people. We've got to invite young people. There was mention of Generation Z and how maybe you're as a councillor, you're as guilty of this as I am. But like trying to communicate with, I'm a father, and trying to communicate with young people just seems to get more and more difficult. So if we can get the enthusiasm of young people, of young vegans, and expose our political parties to this enthusiasm of youth, our political parties will be very open to the idea of including young people being included. So it's, to me, it just makes common sense. To you, probably makes common sense. But make sure that at our events, our social events, that we're providing food that's acceptable to those people. I also wanted to just touch on, I mentioned EDI, sort of equality, diversity and inclusion. If we're going to reach out to people from different groups, I represent, I suppose you do, we both represent urban constituencies, urban wards. I represent at the Elephant and Castle. And I can sort of like travel the world by knocking on 100 different doors. And there's this sort of perception that veganism is a very white middle class event. And like looking around the room, I would tend to sort of endorse that. But there's a sort of paradox that actually when we eat, well, us white vegans actually go out and we're looking for food from across the world. So when we think, if we were to think of veganism as a world diet rather than as a sort of individual diet, please, that's not me.
No, it's my agent, sorry. Ignore it, I'm so sorry.
Mum, don't phone me when I'm at work, I told you.
I should have switched it up, I'm so sorry.
I thought you were joking, but really. Well, that's got me off.
I think it is for you.
So if we were to look at our diet as like I said, I represent a very diverse community, and other members of my political party and of the ruling council group seem to think that it's just a white middle class event. And we really need to break that down and just try to get across to people that if we want to represent everybody, and if we all want to sit down and eat at the table, the universal diet is effectively a plant-based diet.
Yes, absolutely. Do you think there's any mileage in crossing over into animal welfare, animal rights, and embracing all of it in the same, as it were, conversation?
Maybe I've left that out of my narrative, but I don't think, this is quite a broad sweeping statement, but on the whole, I don't think politicians are too concerned about that.
Yeah.
Because the average voter, doesn't connect the fact that they might have a pet dog or a pet dog, but they really don't connect that with eating meat.
Yeah.
And politicians in the same way, they're all very, very busy people, and they just don't make, there was that film, they don't make the connection.
Absolutely. I think it's true. People who have dogs think they are compassionate people. They don't admit to the fact that they have a singular compassion, a kind of speciesism compassion. Thank you so much.
Send them to Korea and let them understand.
Yeah. Richard, drawing from your experience, how can former or current councillors mentor new policymakers to prioritise sustainability and plant-based diets in their agendas?
Again, I think it's, are we on here? 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter. I'll speak louder. I think it's again realising that we have to couch the messaging and the conversation that we're having with them within the sort of the value system for each one of the groups that we're talking to. So just reiterating what's just been said really. So on the left, I'll be looking at positioning the conversation around ethics, food security, equality in food access, those sorts of things. Perhaps on the right of the spectrum, I'll be focusing more on food security, food sovereignty. It's the same thing, I'm just using different terms when talking about this to different groups within particular councils. Humans tend to be most interested in things that affect themselves. So playing on the health is always good, and then working out to the health of the community, cost saving, local health, that sort of thing, probably is not going to get much of a pushback because everybody wants a healthy constituency and they don't spend a lot of money addressing that. As soon as you start increasing the diameter of empathy to the species, you're finding it a much more difficult conversation to have. So a much smaller subset of the population actually care, don't actually think about it. Climate issues, again, are more in the news these days than they were in 2020. But again, unless it's your house that's burning down, it's a bit abstract, right? And you're not going to change your behaviour because there are any number of reasons why you can justify, well, it's not my problem, you know, I've not caused this, it's whatever or whatever. So I think it really is a matter of trying to finesse the arguments to the particular audience you're working with and just keeping going. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, because there was maybe a secondary question, but with the changes post Hayward seat signing, which I just wanted to touch on, which was quite interesting. So one of the changes post signing is that I lost my seat. That's partly because there were boundary changes, so it wasn't completely aligned with plant-based treaty stuff. But looking at it from a sort of an observer perspective, several things I noticed. The billboards around the area over the next year started advertising more plant-based food options. Okay. Now, it's very difficult when you've only got a sample of one to say if that was a direct causal response to what we did, but it's quite obvious that around the train stations, you know, it's like, oh, that's interesting. The other thing is that our local supermarkets, so the Sainsbury's, the Waitrose, vegan plant-based sections are actually really good compared to other cities I've been to around the UK in even wealth areas like Formby and other places up north where much children are based. And again, I do wonder if this sort of has seeped out into the general community more. We got a lot of feedback at the time from vegans in Hayward saying they were delighted, this was fantastic, and I wonder if it just emboldened them a bit further in the choices that they were making, and we started to see the monetary system shifting slightly in response to that through the standard profiling of the consumer and responding with marketing.
Brilliant, wonderful.
I just want to jump in on the positioning and how we pitch to different audiences. I think this left-right divide is becoming less and less relevant to a certain degree. And I think what we're seeing more is establishment, anti-establishment.
Yeah.
And I think veganism fits quite nicely within that anti-establishment theme that's, I think, being felt across the UK, and we're seeing that with the way that people are voting.
I'd add on to that actually, it's local democracy versus centralised democracy as well, which is different words for same.
Thank you. This next question is to everyone, but Alex, perhaps you can lead on this. How can the public engage with their elected councillors and convince them to prioritise plant-based treaty and plant-based policies?
Yeah, so there's many things that the public can do, which, I mean, I've done quite a lot of things. It'd be interesting to know from the councillors what actually works. So there's many things you can do. There's writing emails to your councillors. There's getting the local petitions done and signed. There's going and speaking at your local council meeting. So not many people know that you can just turn up to your local council and ask a question to the entire room of councillors, known as a deputation. So they're quite powerful, and it might be a bit daunting, but yeah, definitely worth trying. And then there's also, you know, the chance of actually meeting up with councillors in person and trying to actually discuss with them. But I think one of the challenges is actually actually getting the meetings with the councillors, because you might be sending emails and writing letters, but it's how do you actually pique their interest to then engage with you and actually arrange a meeting or a conversation in a way. So there's many things that I think we can do from the public, from campaigning, but it'd be interesting to know from the council perspective what works from the inside.
Absolutely, great. Would you like to pass the mic along? No, you can go next.
Me?
Yeah, please.
What works? At the time, this was 2020, so no one was coming in and raising the issue with us. Certainly, support from the local vegan groups I find useful, but I think the things you've been talking about now, it will prime time for people to stop doing that, would be my recommendation. I don't know how you guys feel are actually the job.
Do you want to go?
Sure. You can see your own local councillor. Usually they have a councillor surgery, so if you go onto the website, find your councillor or whatever, your local area, usually they have a time every month where they'll go to a local library or whatever, and you can go and just have a sit down chat with them, something that you might need to book ahead. Most councillors, I think, have pigeonholes in the town hall, so you can write a letter, and I think that's more and more powerful when people get inundated with emails. If they suddenly find that someone's written them a letter, they might take that a little bit more seriously. And then there's, again, going into sort of the detail of each individual council, the council constitution should have a section on how the public can engage the council more generally. So, for example, in my council we have options for a petition, although that can be quite difficult, so you need about 750 people to sign a petition. But there's an easier way to get to the full council, which is a deputation, where you get 10 residents and a councillor to support it, and that will mean that you'll get 5 minutes at the full council meeting. You get to ask questions, and then the cabinet member relevant to that area will be able to respond to you. So I think looking at the constitution and seeing what options you have for engaging is really good. And then obviously a lot of local councillors are on social media, or the councils are on social media, and you can that's easy just to go and drop someone a comment and see if they get back to you.
Excellent, thank you.
It's really good, Alistair. Oh, it seems to be working now. A few years ago there was a website called theyworkforyou.com, which sounds fantastic, but actually makes me feel like I'm under the cosh. And actually it's a really good way of upsetting, I'm speaking frankly now, because I'm amongst friends, but it's just like, I get like a thought, maybe you've had them as well, did you get them? And it's just like, you work for me, so you've got to read this, and you've got to reply, and you've got to do it, because this is what I think. And it really doesn't start a positive relationship with your locally elected politicians. Of course I did read it, and of course I did reply, and of course I was polite. I mean, I can charm the birds out of the trees when I want to, but there are better ways of using human relations. So, yeah, like Ali said, there are ward councillors usually do surgeries once or twice a week. That's a great opportunity to turn up with a thermos of tea and a couple of vegan biscuits and sit down and have a chat and actually find out about the person behind the position of councillor. As Alistair said, if you take a minute to look on the council website, you'll find out who the cabinet member for healthy eating or for healthy communities, who's the cabinet member for environmentalism or climate change or whatever, and you can reach them on their agenda, and that's what's important to them. And so then there'll be scrutiny committees. There'll be, I'm vice chair of the Environment Scrutiny Committee, so I can call in things that the council are doing. So I can find out, for example, we could have like an investigation into how the school dinners, how are they prepared, what's their carbon footprint, do the pupils enjoy them? And so we just like drill down into activities that the council's got. But you're only going to really find those things out if you engage with the councillors on a meaningful basis. And as Alex said, we've got to start small. We've got, I think anyone that's read Chomsky will understand, there are massive vested interests trying to stop us at every turn. And we've got to do, we want to do everything that we can to try and turn that tide, to make sure that we've got plant-based food available at hospitals and schools and in prisons and at council meetings and at your work and wherever. so that people can make those choices, positive choices, and so that we can grow this movement.
Fantastic, thank you, that's fabulous. Wonderful comments from you all. Ladies and gentlemen, give our guests a